Before we begin tonight's slow story, I invite you to pause, to let your body soften, to let your breath deepen, and to allow the world around you to quiet down just a little. You've done enough today. Now it's time to rest, to unwind from the noise, to float gently into a slower rhythm. Take a deep breath in and let it go. Notice how your shoulders ease just a bit, how your fingers grow still, how the muscles behind your eyes soften with every blink. You're safe here, you're welcome here, and you don't have to do anything but listen. If you enjoy these gentle bedtime stories, made to help you fall asleep or simply slow down, feel free to subscribe to Fusion Ha. There's a whole playlist of relaxing stories on the channel waiting for you, all told in the same calm, cozy way. No pressure, just a quiet invitation for stillness, for comfort, for sleep. Now, let the sound of my voice fade into the background. Let each word arrive like a soft breath on your skin. Let your thoughts drift like leaves floating on water. You don't need to stay awake for the whole story. You're not here to learn or remember. You're here to let go. Let go of the clock. Let go of the lists. Let go of the weight you've been carrying all day. This is your time now. A moment made just for you. To slow down, to breathe, to drift. And as you settle in, let your mind open gently, like a door creaking open in a quiet house. Let the rest of the world fall away. You're not in a rush. You're not behind. You're exactly where you need to be. Your story is about to begin. But first, just rest here with me in this stillness. Let the hush of evening wrap around you. Let the gentle pace of the story carry you. And when you're ready, we'll begin. Let's begin, not with the phone boxes themselves, but with the quiet before them. The early 20th century was a time of transition for London. The streets, still lined with gas lamps and soot-darkened brick, were beginning to pulse with a new kind of life. Trams rumbled past rows of Victorian terraced homes. Telegram boys zipped through the fog with messages folded in their coat pockets, and public buildings, libraries, museums, town halls, stood proudly at the heart of each neighborhood, like sentinels of civic order. But communication was still tethered to place. If you didn't own a telephone in your home, and most didn't, connecting with someone by voice meant venturing out into the street, into the weather, into the unknown. And for a time, the experience was inconsistent. Some early public phone kiosks were simple booths, tucked into railway stations or tucked awkwardly beside post boxes. Others were little more than wooden sheds with coin slots and poor acoustics. They varied in design, in quality, and in location. Some were easy to find, most were not. People began to ask, could there be a better way? Could something utilitarian also be beautiful? The answer came in 1924. That year, the Royal Fine Art Commission held a design competition. Its aim, to create a standardized telephone kiosk for public use, one that would be durable, practical, and yes, pleasing to the eye, something that could stand at the edge of a busy square or just outside a parish garden and still look as though it belonged. Into this scene stepped a man named Sir Giles Gilbert Scott. His name might not ring out today, but his fingerprints are all over London. He was a trained architect, thoughtful, quiet, known not for flamboyance, but for dignity. He had designed Liverpool Cathedral, an enormous, reverent space, and had just completed a number of public buildings marked by strong lines, soft ornamentation, and an appreciation for both function and grace. When asked to submit a kiosk design, he approached it with the same sensibility. His proposed model was square, with small paned windows and a domed roof, shaped like a miniature temple. The top of the kiosk would be crowned with a crown, an elegant symbol of state authority. Its materials would be cast iron, and the whole thing would be painted silver with a light blue-green interior. That was his vision. But visions often change. The General Post Office, which oversaw the telephone service at the time, liked the shape. They loved the dome. But they wanted something that would stand out in the growing cityscape. Silver would vanish into fog and soot, so they chose red, bright, unmistakable, bold red, and just like that, a new chapter began. The first version of Scott's kiosk was called the K2, short for Kiosk Number 2. It was heavy, made entirely of cast iron, and placed initially in central London locations. Though large and costly to produce, it carried with it a dignified charm. It didn't try to disappear. It stood up and said, "Here I am." And Londoners, skeptical at first, began to accept it. The K2 was followed by other models. The K3, made from concrete. The K4, which included a built-in stamp machine and post box, and eventually the K6, perhaps the most beloved of them all. Released in 1936 to commemorate the Silver Jubilee of King George IV, the K6 was smaller, lighter, and designed for widespread use. This is the version most people picture when they think of the red telephone box, and for good reason. By the late 1930s, they were everywhere, from Piccadilly to the Peak District, from rainy roundabouts in Cornwall to windswept lanes in the Scottish Highlands, each one the same familiar shape: domed roof, rows of small paned windows, narrow doors, and that bold red paint, currant red to be exact. And inside, the world changed. People proposed inside those booths. They cried. They made first calls and final calls. They phoned home from war. They received news of births, of deaths, of jobs gained and lost. The red box became not just a tool, but a stage, a tiny stage for some of the most intimate moments in human life. But it wasn't just the design or the color or the ubiquity that made them beloved. It was the care. Each kiosk was maintained by local telephone engineers, cleaned regularly, and lit at night. The brass dialing instructions inside were clear and tactile. The doors were weighted just enough to offer privacy without noise. Even the glass was selected to resist clouding, and for a long time they stood unchallenged. The world moved around them, and still they held their ground, reassuring, unchanging, quietly watchful. But time does what it always does, and by the 1980s, change had arrived. With the rise of private telephony, home phones, car phones, and later mobile phones, the humble red kiosk began to feel obsolete. Some were removed, others were vandalized, still more were painted over, repurposed, or left to rust. But something curious happened. People protested, not with rage or banners, but with petitions, with letters, with photographs and poems, and arguments about why these boxes mattered. They weren't just structures, they were part of the scenery, part of the identity, part of the memory of a place. And so, in response to public affection, many were preserved. Over 2,000 red telephone boxes, mostly K6 models, were granted listed status in the UK, meaning they are legally protected due to their historical and architectural significance. Some were restored, others repurposed as libraries, as art galleries, as tiny homes for defibrillators and Wi-Fi hotspots. But many were simply left alone, left to stand, to watch, to wait, to remind us of a time when communication required presence, when a conversation required a coin, when news arrived not through a screen, but through a receiver pressed to your ear inside a small red box on a street corner in the rain. And that is how they remain, not forgotten, but remembered slowly, with fondness, and now, perhaps, with a bit of sleep, because you've heard the beginning now. You've walked the cobbled streets. You've run your fingers along the iron frame. You've heard the click of the latch, the hum of the line, the voice on the other end. And so now, let it all fade. Let the paint blur. Let the glass fog over. Let your thoughts drift away like a call unanswered, not lost, just left for later. Sleep now. We'll return again soon, with more. But for now, the line is quiet. The booth is empty, and the world has gone still. As the 20th century stretched out, London's red telephone boxes were no longer just functional. They became woven into the fabric of the city, a familiar sight that stood like a sentinel, marking the boundaries of neighborhoods and parks, the edges of streets and squares. Over time, they were not only used for making calls, but also became part of the story of the people who lived with them, who grew up seeing them at every corner. The red telephone box began to symbolize much more than just a device for communication. People began to notice its unique position within the larger urban landscape. It was small, small enough to blend into the street, but large enough to stand proudly with the proud buildings around it. And although it was always in public view, it still provided a certain privacy, a small cocoon where people could make personal phone calls, protected from the world, encased in a red box that seemed to slow the outside noise and time just enough to hear the voice on the other end of the line. Through the years, the telephone box's role in the city evolved. It became a symbol of connection, not just for those who used it, but for the collective memory of the city. Generations grew up with them. Children saw them in films, in postcards, in photographs of their parents' lives. They stood in the background of family photos, seen but never really thought about. They were simply there, a part of the city that didn't change, even as everything else did. As the city grew more modern, new communication technologies slowly made the telephone box less vital. First came the expansion of landlines into homes. Then came the rise of mobile phones. Public telephone boxes, once vital for a phone call, started to see less foot traffic. In some areas, they were being replaced by newer models or removed entirely. And yet, the public's affection for these little red boxes did not wane. In the 1980s, when the phone box seemed to be on the verge of disappearing altogether, something remarkable happened. People began to protest, not loudly, but quietly, persistently. Photographs of red telephone boxes began to appear in magazines, on postcards, and on the covers of books. Their image was immortalized in art, literature, and photography. They were more than just telephone booths now. They were icons. There was a growing realization that something about the red telephone box connected people to London's past, something that spoke of simpler times, of moments that had to be shared face to face, of human connection that required time, effort, and, yes, a coin or two. It wasn't just about the telephone anymore. It was about what it represented. As the years wore on, the government took action to protect them. Thousands of the K6 boxes were granted listed status, preserving them as architectural landmarks. It was no longer just a matter of functional utility. It was about the place these iconic structures had in the cultural consciousness of the city and its people. And so, they were restored and repurposed. Many of the K6 boxes that had been placed in parks, on quiet streets, and in town squares became landmarks in their own right. Some were turned into small libraries, their windows filled with books for passers-by to borrow. Others became art installations painted by local artists in bold hues, each one unique. Some even became home to life-saving defibrillators. They still stood there, steadfast and reassuring, at the edges of city life, unchanging, always available for anyone who needed a moment of solitude, call to make, a memory to be revisited. For those who grew up with them, the red telephone box was more than just a tool. It was a reminder of simpler times, of slower paces, and of a world that valued human connection above all else. But even as the years passed and the boxes became less essential for phone calls, they remained a part of the London landscape. They stood not just as functional kiosks, but as lasting symbols of the past, carrying with them the weight of history and the promise of continuity. In many ways, the red telephone boxes became like old friends. They weathered storms, they were moved and adjusted, but they never truly disappeared. They stayed in the city's heart, woven into the landscape like a shared memory. And so, London continues to be a city with stories hidden in corners, behind lampposts, along cobbled streets, and often right next to the old red telephone boxes. They remain as much a part of the city as the River Thames, as the pubs lining every corner, as the grand old bridges connecting neighborhoods. They have been seen and forgotten, passed by and revered, but never ignored. And in the quiet of the night, when you walk past one of these boxes, its glass window softly glowing, its metal frame still as sturdy as ever, you can almost hear the echoes of voices from another time, stories being shared, memories being made. Now, as the evening wraps its final, delicate tendrils around the city, let yourself feel the quiet comfort of this place. Let the gentle hum of history wrap around you like a blanket. You've heard the story of the telephone box, of how it became part of the city's fabric, its pulse, and now the city is quieter, the fog is thicker, the hum of the world outside fades just a little. Let yourself be wrapped in this peaceful, slow pace. The day is done, the story is shared, the call is over, the box is empty. There's something about walking through a city and finding pieces of the past tucked gently into the present. In London, those pieces don't always shout for attention. Some are quiet, hidden in iron railings shaped like forgotten initials, in stone doorways with soot-streaked carvings, in lampposts that lean slightly from a century of winter wind. And then there are those that stand upright, unmistakable, as though time has refused to let them fade. The red telephone box is one such piece. By the mid-20th century, it was no longer just a modern invention or a clever bit of public utility. It had become part of the daily rhythm of British life, not a landmark in the formal sense, but something more intimate, a familiar silhouette against the morning fog, a flash of red in a world of stone and gray skies. And in the 1950s and 60s, the red phone box was as much a part of the street as the postman or the pigeon or the smell of fresh bread from the corner shop. They were everywhere, at village greens and city crossroads, outside banks and bus stops, near the steps of churches and beside playground gates. And each box had a little world inside. At first glance, the red telephone box might have seemed purely functional, just a sturdy frame with a telephone inside, but its design revealed an unusual blend of utility and care. The doors opened smoothly, waited to close gently behind you. The windows, those small square panes of reinforced glass, offered a view in and out, but gave just enough separation to feel private. And inside, there was always that familiar smell: metal, paper, dust, the lingering scent of hands and pockets and stories. The floor was slightly raised, the walls were solid, and the little instruction card, tucked above the phone, offered directions in simple, clear type. Some boxes had hooks for coats, small mirrors above the dial, or corkboards with community notices pinned beside the handset and the phones themselves. They weren't rushed. You'd drop a coin into the slot, hear it clink deep inside the mechanism, and listen for the tone. You'd spin the rotary dial, pausing slightly as it clicked back with each number. And then, once the call connected, your voice would travel not wirelessly, but through miles of buried line. The person on the other end might be just around the corner or across the country, but in that moment, they were there, in your ear, in your breath, in your silence. Many people remember those moments, not because the call was extraordinary, but because the setting made it so. One mother phoned the school every Thursday to ask if her daughter had remembered her mittens. A grandfather called his son's office just to hear him answer. Teenagers huddled inside, daring each other to call someone they liked. Soldiers called home with trembling hands, and children clutched the phone with both palms, telling a parent everything they'd learned that day. At school, it was connection made visible. You stood in the box, you held the line, and the world outside softened. But it wasn't just what happened inside the box that made them beloved. It was what they became in the cultural memory of Britain. By the 1960s, the red telephone box had become something more than a place to make a call. It had entered the collective imagination. Artists sketched them into cityscapes. Writers used them as metaphors for privacy, for pause, for the quiet in between. Tourists photographed them. Locals passed them daily without a glance until they vanished, and then missed them dearly. They began to appear in films, on stamps, in poems and paintings. They stood, red and unblinking, in scenes of joy and crisis alike. One might watch a quiet goodbye beneath falling snow. Another, the laughter of children splashing in summer puddles. And some stood witness to history, near protests, parades, and turning points too quiet to be written into textbooks. And still, they did their job, unmoving, uncomplaining, ever present. But the world around them began to change. As technology evolved, the need for a public telephone diminished. By the 1980s, most homes had their own lines. Mobile phones were not yet common, but they were on the horizon. And so, the red telephone boxes, once essential, began to seem outdated. They were costly to maintain, vulnerable to damage, and slowly they began to disappear. Some were removed by councils seeking to modernize. Others were vandalized and not repaired. And many were simply left, standing but unused, growing dusty and forgotten in the background of a city that had moved on. It was during this time that their true cultural importance revealed itself. Communities across the UK began to push back, not against progress, but against disappearance. Letters were written, petitions gathered, photographers documented the remaining boxes as though preserving something sacred. Local newspapers ran stories titled Last Box on the Corner or Where Did Our Red Booth Go? It wasn't just nostalgia, it was recognition that these red boxes were a part of place, that they had shaped streetscapes, held memories, and earned a right to stay, not as functioning telephones necessarily, but as guardians of a quieter past. And so began the era of preservation and transformation. Historic England, the public body responsible for protecting the nation's heritage, granted listed status to more than 2,000 red telephone boxes, protecting them from removal or drastic alteration. Communities got creative. One village turned its booth into a book exchange, another into a home for a defibrillator. In some towns, they became art galleries, tiny information hubs, or community seed libraries. And in some places, they were simply cleaned, painted, and left to stand, proud and unused, but still beautiful. The boxes had evolved, no longer tools for communication. They had become monuments to it. They now symbolized more than just phone calls. They represented a time when connection required movement, when finding someone meant walking, waiting, dialing, when privacy was carved out in the middle of a busy street and respected by passers-by. And even today, in the age of instant messages and video calls, people still stop beside them. They take photographs. They peek inside. They tell children stories about coins and rotary dials. The red box still speaks, not through the ring of the phone, but through the memory it holds. And for Londoners, for visitors, for dreamers and wanderers alike, it remains a symbol of the city's enduring charm. It doesn't change. It endures, even in the quiet, even in the corner, even in the pause between then and now. Let that be enough for tonight. Let the stories linger. Let the streets grow still. And let the red boxes continue to stand through fog, through time, through the soft hush of memory. Evening comes early in London during winter. By the time the gas lamps begin to glow, the sky is already a deep navy, and the city seems to press inward toward its hearths, its teapots, its windows lit from within. On nights like these, the red telephone box stands quietly beneath halos of mist and lamplight, unchanged and unhurried. Some might pass by without noticing. Others stop just long enough to peer in, as if expecting something more than a receiver and a dial tone. Perhaps, in a way, that's exactly what they're hoping for. By now, the red telephone box has long since outlived its original purpose, but rather than being discarded, it's entered a quieter stage of its life, not as a tool, but as a companion to the city's changing pace, a reminder that some things, when made with intention, can outlast the systems they were built for, not through stubbornness, but through quiet presence. Across the United Kingdom, Thousands of these phone boxes remain, some in pristine condition, others faded and chipped, their paint cracked, their glass fogged with time, and yet each one holds a story, each one holds a place. Let's visit a few of them, shall we? There's a red telephone box in the Lake District, nestled between two low stone walls. It looks out across rolling fields and quiet grazing sheep. No one uses the phone anymore, but the box still stands. A handwritten sign inside invites hikers to leave a note. Some leave folded pieces of paper, others write poems or draw tiny sketches of their walks. One note, pinned carefully, called home just to say I made it to the top. Thank you, Red Box. Farther south, in a small Cornish village, a box near the harbor has been turned into a tiny book swap. Its shelves, once designed to house telephone directories, now cradle novels with curling pages, cookbooks with margin notes, and children's books donated by passing holiday makers. The inside smells like rain and paper, and across the street, an old man watches from his bakery window every afternoon, making sure no book stays lonely for too long. In the Scottish Highlands, there's a box painted slightly darker than most. Its red faded by weather and softened by snow. It houses a life-saving defibrillator. There's no plaque, no grand announcement, just a sign above the door, to be used with care, and only when needed. Even there, in the windswept quiet, the red telephone box is still part of something vital. And, of course, in London, they remain, framed in every travel photo, standing beside double-decker buses and centuries-old churches. Some are painted gold to commemorate Olympic athletes. Others are restored with brass fittings and polished glass. One stands outside the British Museum. Tourists line up to take pictures with it, but after dark, when the crowds thin and the streets return to their slower rhythm, the box remains in place, steady, familiar, watching. In a way, these red boxes have become anchors in a moving world, because the truth is, cities change. London has grown taller, faster, louder. It's filled now with skyscrapers, cycle lanes, and satellite dishes, but still, these little booths remain, part monument, part memory, part mystery. They don't demand attention. They simply stay. And in staying, they offer something rare, a still point in a turning world. Inside, the air is different, slightly warmer, slightly quieter, like the walls remember voices and carry them like soft echoes. Even though many of the phones no longer function, people still step inside from time to time, not always to make a call, sometimes just to breathe, to find a pocket of quiet, to rest their hands on the cold metal, to watch the city through glass. There's something comforting about that, knowing there are places designed not just for function, but for pause. The red telephone box has always carried that weight. When Sir Giles Gilbert Scott designed the original version back in the 1920s, he didn't know he was creating something. iconic. He simply designed with care, with proportion, with thought. He used classical influences, drawing from ancient temples, from curves that pleased the eye and steadied the hand, the domed roof, the paneled windows, the door that fit snugly and shut with a solid sound. He believed public structures could be beautiful. That utility didn't mean ugliness, that even a telephone kiosk could be shaped with the same dignity as a cathedral door. And he was right. His design endured. More than that, it was loved. That's rare. And perhaps that's why people still feel something when they pass by one of these red boxes, even if they've never used one. It's not just nostalgia, it's recognition that someone, somewhere, once believed even the smallest corner of a street deserved care. That shelter could be shaped with grace. That conversation, though fleeting, deserved a space of its own. And while many of the booths today no longer hold phones, they still offer that space. A quiet nook in the middle of noise, a red outline of memory, a standing poem made of cast iron and glass. As the years continue, more changes will come. Some boxes will be taken down, others repurposed. A few may be forgotten, but many, many will remain because people will keep finding new ways to keep them alive. As seed banks, as lending libraries, as quiet booths for reflection or memory or simply being. And because cities need stillness just as much as they need motion, red telephone boxes offer that, not as relics, but as companions. They remind us that design matters, that memory matters, that connection doesn't always come through speed. Sometimes it comes through presence, through slowness, through standing still while everything else moves around you. And so, wherever you find one, by a canal, at the edge of a park, hidden behind ivy, in an old village, stop for a moment, place your hand on the door, step inside, let the world hush for just a little while, and if you listen carefully, you may hear something, not a dial tone, not a ringtone, but the quiet hum of stories still held in the air. Let's pause for a moment in the middle of London. You're standing on a quiet street, the kind with uneven stone paving, a gentle curve, and buildings with black iron balconies and ivy tracing their edges. The air carries the faint scent of coal smoke and distant toast. The wind, though chilled, is soft. There's no rush of traffic, no pressing noise, only the muffled rhythm of footsteps on wet pavement and the occasional bark of a dog echoing from a side street. And there it is, at the corner, tucked between a crumbling brick wall and a cast iron post box. One of London's red telephone boxes. It leans just slightly to one side, its paint a little faded, its window panes clouded from time and weather. But it stands. You stop beside it. It's not your destination, but something about it makes you pause. Maybe it's the color, still vibrant in a gray city. Maybe it's the shape, elegant, curved, classic, Or maybe it's the feeling it carries, something unspoken but heavy with memory, because these boxes were never just kiosks. They were thresholds, places between one space and another, between one person and another, between silence and the sound of someone's voice. And that's part of what makes them enduring. They are physical reminders of pause, of reaching out, of the act of communication before it was invisible, before it was wireless, instant, and effortless. Inside, the design was careful, purposeful. The shelves at the top once held thick directories, books filled with names and numbers, printed in small, tidy lines. Every surname, a story. Every page, a map to someone, somewhere, waiting to be reached. People use them differently. A mother might open the door with her purse clutched tightly in one hand, a list of numbers scribbled on the back of a receipt in the other. A schoolboy might run in with a 5-pence coin, dialing home before the rain started. A husband, after walking his dog through Hyde Park, might stop to phone his wife and say, "Don't wait for me, I'll grab a bun on the way back." And sometimes people went in just to hear something, a familiar voice, a gentle reminder, a laugh they hadn't heard in too long. The box gave them that, and always, the world outside softened for just a moment. Even now, these red boxes are deeply tied to Britain's visual identity. Think of London's great icons. You have Big Ben, timeless and dignified. The Tower Bridge, strung across the river like a suspended crown. The London Eye, sleek and modern. And then, quietly, with no moving parts, you have the red telephone box. It appears in postcards beside royal guards and double-decker buses. It's stitched into tea towels, printed on mugs, cast in miniature as a souvenir for visitors to take home. It stands not just for communication, but for presence. It says, "You are here, you are in London, and more importantly, something lasting lives here." That's rare in cities. Most things in urban life are made to change, to be replaced. But these little booths have lasted because people saw themselves in them, in their structure, in their quiet strength, in their ability to offer something simple, a moment of connection in the middle of everything else. That may be why so many people were reluctant to let them go. When BT, British Telecom, began decommissioning boxes in the late 20th century, it wasn't just nostalgia that drove the pushback. It was a shared understanding that the boxes had moved beyond function. They had become cultural anchors. So, communities adopted them. They painted them, repaired them, gave them new lives. Some were converted into miniature art museums with rotating displays and visitor books for passers-by to leave notes. Others became stations for public services, storing first aid kits, maps, even phone chargers powered by solar panels. One box in Wales became a storytelling booth, a place where children could step inside, press a button, and hear local tales told in their native tongue. In Oxfordshire, one red telephone box houses a rotating exhibition of single poems. Each month, a new verse is posted inside, laminated and pinned for all to read, and in some places, the booths were simply left as they were, not repurposed, not renovated, just preserved, so that someone could open the door, step inside, and remember. It's easy to romanticize them, of course, and yet, when something becomes a symbol, it carries a weight that goes beyond its original purpose. The red telephone box is part of the story of public design in the UK. It was one of the first nationwide examples of how design could marry form and function in public life. Before that, few everyday structures were crafted with such care, but the telephone box proved that even a practical object, a box meant to house a phone, could become beautiful, even iconic. Sir Giles, Gilbert Scott's influence, lingered long after the first K2 was installed. His commitment to proportion, elegance, and restraint shaped not only the booths, but the expectations of a public that came to associate beauty with utility. Today, we rarely notice good design when it's done well, but the red phone box stands out because it was designed with longevity in mind. It doesn't try to keep up with the world. It holds steady, and in doing so, it becomes timeless. So the next time you see one, whether in the heart of London, beside a winding country lane, or quietly tucked beneath ivy in a sleepy village, pause, step inside. If it's open, let the door close softly behind you. Run your hand over the cool metal. Look through the fogged glass at the world outside. You don't have to call anyone. You don't have to do anything at all. Just stand still and let yourself feel how rare that is. Not every red telephone box tells the same story. Some stood at the center of villages, beside parish notice boards and corner shops that sold both newspapers and boiled sweets. Others lined railway platforms, the last place someone could make a call before boarding a train bound for somewhere unfamiliar. A few were tucked beside petrol stations or bus depots, while others held quiet vigil on rain-slicked lanes, surrounded by hedges or wildflowers, or nothing at all. Each one had a different setting, but they all held the same purpose. They waited, unmoving, unblinking, offering connection, and inside, whether you were 8 years old or 80, something changed the moment you closed the door. You weren't just on the street anymore. You were in a room of your own, a red-framed pocket of privacy in the wide-open world. By the 1970s, the red telephone box had become as familiar to British streets as pavement and lamplight. Even those who had never used one could describe it in perfect detail. Its curved roof, its narrow door, the word telephone in bold black letters across a white panel at the top. But familiarity doesn't always mean attention. Many people walked by them without a second glance, until, that is, they began to disappear. As telephone services evolved and mobile technology crept forward, The red boxes were deemed unnecessary. Their maintenance was expensive, their mechanisms outdated, and their usage, slowly, was declining. The removals started quietly, one box here, another there, replaced by modern glass and steel versions, angular, clean, practical, and forgettable. And something curious happened. People noticed, not because they needed to use the phone that day, but because something was missing: a color, a shape, a memory. And so began what many would later call the Save Our Boxes movement. Not a loud campaign, but a widespread one. Individuals, local councils, historical societies, and ordinary residents began speaking up. They wrote letters, signed petitions, took photographs, and collected stories. And they asked a simple question: if we let this go, what else will follow? Because the red telephone box had become a symbol of something much larger than telephones. It had come to represent a shared past, a moment in time when design met purpose with dignity, when architecture didn't rush, and when even small public objects were given the grace of proportion and presence. Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, who had designed the now beloved domed style, had died in 1960. He never lived to see just how deeply the British public would fall in love with his creation. He never saw the postcards, the wedding photos, the tourism brochures, the art galleries that would later hang sketches of his K2 and K6 kiosks like portraits. But perhaps he knew. Perhaps when he first drew the curved roof that echoed the form of ancient tombs and placed it atop a booth meant for daily use, he understood that beauty, when paired with function, could become something eternal. By the late 1980s, British Telecom, now responsible for thousands of aging kiosks, introduced a plan to decommission most of the red boxes in favor of newer designs. The public response was swift, and in response to that response, something unprecedented happened. Over 2,500 red telephone boxes were granted listed status, meaning they were now legally protected as structures of architectural and historical significance. This wasn't just about preservation, it was an act of cultural acknowledgement that these small red boxes, once dismissed as everyday utility, had become landmarks. From that point on, their story entered a new chapter, one of adaptation. Some red telephone boxes were adopted by villages and given new lives. A group of volunteers in Somerset turned theirs into a community defibrillator station. A rural Scottish village converted one into a weather station, complete with gauges and forecasts written in chalk. In London, a box near Covent Garden was transformed into a photo booth. Another, near a quiet square in Yorkshire, became a lending library, filled with dog-eared paperbacks, children's books, and postcards from visitors around the world. Others became greenhouses, housing potted herbs and ivy vines. Some became tiny art galleries. A few became confessionals, not religious ones, but open confession stations for those who needed to share anonymously with a notebook and pen left inside. Each reuse carried its own quiet poetry. It was proof that the box, even stripped of its original purpose, still held space, and more importantly, held meaning. Inside the red telephone box, time always felt slightly different. It was a place where seconds stretched, where you could hear your own breathing, where the city, so loud, so layered, suddenly seemed far away. Even the smell was specific: dust, paint, old metal, rain-dampened wood, and faintly, the ghost of 1,000 stories whispered into handsets. For some, it was the smell of waiting. For others, it was the scent of a decision being made. Because important things happened inside those boxes: proposals, apologies, updates, warnings, goodbyes. They weren't always planned, but they were often remembered. And so, even now, when many of the boxes no longer carry working phones, people step inside and remember. They stand quietly. They breathe slowly. Sometimes they take a picture. Sometimes they just listen. And outside, the world carries on. To be still in a red telephone box is to participate in a quiet tradition. It's a space of pause in a city built for motion, a symbol of care in a world increasingly made for speed. It reminds us that function doesn't have to be joyless, that design, when thoughtful, can become timeless, and that some things are worth keeping, not because they're useful, but because they're familiar. The red box tells us, you're here, you're seen, you're part of something lasting. It doesn't speak, but it doesn't need to. Its presence says enough. So if ever you find yourself walking the winding back streets of a British town, in the quiet of evening, in the hush of early morning, and you turn a corner and see one of them, stop, just for a moment. Step closer. Look at the way the paint still holds, the way the crown shines above the word telephone, the way the door feels cool beneath your hand. Open it, step inside, close the door, and breathe. Because what you're stepping into isn't just a box, it's a room made of memory. The sky over London is always changing. Sometimes it arrives in long, low grays that hang over rooftops like wool coats. Other days, it comes blue and brilliant, cut by the lines of chimneys and railway bridges. But there are moments, quiet, overlooked moments, when the sky is a pale silver just before rain, and the city feels like it's paused, held, not hurried, waiting, not rushing. In moments like that, the red telephone box seems to shine a little brighter, not in color, it has always been red, but in presence. There, among the flickering lampposts, brick walls, and the gentle shuffle of passing coats, it stands, still, reliable, familiar. The kind of thing you notice most when you need to. For years, they were simply part of the backdrop, and then they weren't. Once threatened with disappearance, the red telephone box survived not through law alone, but through love. Communities across the UK, villages, City councils, neighborhood groups chose to keep them alive, some by adopting them for new uses, others by simply maintaining them as they were. In that process, something special emerged. The red telephone box stopped being a utility and became something else entirely, a storyteller. Each one now tells a tale, not just of its own past, but of the city or town around it, where it stands, what it's seen, what it now protects. Let's walk through a few of these stories. In a village near the coast of Norfolk, a red telephone box stands at the foot of a hill, close to a war memorial and a wooden bench carved with names. The phone has long been disconnected, but inside, the shelves have been repurposed into a memory archive. Visitors leave notes, stories of relatives who lived in the village, drawings by local children, newspaper clippings from decades gone by. There's even a guest book with names and dates, some written by hand so carefully you can almost hear the pen scratching as they signed. One entry reads, "I came here every summer as a boy. Thank you for keeping this here." In Manchester, a box stands near a library. It contains a rotating poetry display. Each week, a new poem is chosen and printed in the same font, laminated and pinned beside a box of sharpened pencils. Beneath the poem, a small prompt, leave a line, we'll add it to next week's verse. And so, strangers write together, never meeting, never knowing, but creating, line by line, a slow story that only the box itself carries. In Wales, near the edge of a quiet farm, a phone box holds a seed exchange. Old tins rest on small wooden planks, each tin labeled by hand: spring beans, marigold mix, climbing peas. Locals stop by with envelopes, sometimes with just a few seeds, wrapped in wax paper, carefully folded and left for someone else. A small sign reads, "Take what you need, leave what you can, grow something beautiful." These stories aren't rare. They're everywhere. Not grand, not flashy, but soft, steady, kind. And in that way, they mirror the design of the box itself. Because at its heart, the red telephone box is about simplicity. A door, a frame, a space. But within that simplicity lies possibility. It's why they've endured, not just because of what they were, but because of what they can become. That's a rare kind of design, one that leaves room for change without losing shape. Architects often speak of public furniture, structures like benches, fountains, lamps, and kiosks that aren't owned in the usual way, but belong to everyone. The red telephone box is the finest example of this. It's public, yes, but also deeply personal. It holds memories not for a person, but for many people, all at once, across time. It doesn't move, but it travels through stories. It doesn't speak, but it listens. It doesn't ask, but it gives. A place to call from, a place to cry in, a place to pause. And now, more than ever, a place to be noticed again. Walk through London today, and you'll still find them near quiet pubs, beside fire stations, tucked into alleys where ivy creeps across the top pane. Some are perfectly restored, painted fresh, their brass shining, their glass replaced and crystal clear. Others are weathered, with moss near the base and a rattle in the doorframe. But each one, regardless of condition, still holds a kind of grace, a dignity that comes from having served without asking for attention, from having offered connection, shelter, and memory to thousands of people without ever needing to be thanked. And for many, just seeing one is enough to stir something, a memory, a moment, a sense of place. You don't need to have used one to understand. You only need to have noticed. The red telephone box remains not because it's useful, but because it's trusted. It reminds people of a time when communication was effortful and therefore meaningful, when you couldn't just reach into your pocket to speak with someone. You had to walk, wait, choose your moment, and sometimes that extra step gave those moments more weight. You were present, you were listening, you were heard. In a world of instant exchange and flickering notifications, the red telephone box offers something slower, a pause, a memory, a place. And even if you never step inside one, the fact that it's there, that it hasn't been replaced, erased, or forgotten, means something. It says, this mattered, and still does. Let's begin with the way the light falls. It's late afternoon in a quiet corner of London. Not the grand avenues or tourist-lined roads, but somewhere more ordinary. A residential street. Trees bare from winter. Rows of brick. Houses softened by age and soot. And there, at the end of the footpath, stands a red telephone box. It's not perfectly maintained. The paint has chipped along the edges. One pane of glass has a small crack spidering out like frost, but it's there, upright, present, and it catches the light just right. The low sun filters through the glass, tinting the interior with a soft red glow. It spills onto the pavement like a warm spill of memory. A child walks past, pointing at it with curiosity. The adult beside them explains what it is, or rather, what it was. That's the strange thing about the red telephone box now. It lives in two tenses at once. It was something, and it is something, and both are true. In its past, it was a place of urgency. People made calls when they had no other way to. They stepped inside with shaking hands, or with laughter, or with news too large to carry alone. They dug in their pockets for coins. They read numbers scribbled on slips of paper. They stood still and hoped someone would answer. But now, it has become a vessel for something quieter. Not urgency, but presence. There's a small town in Lincolnshire with a telephone box that's become a time capsule. Inside, local residents leave one item each year, A note, a photograph, a trinket. The box is never opened except on the same day annually when the contents are read, remembered, and added to. Over time, it has become not just a box of memories, but a rhythm, a ritual. One visitor described it this way: it's not the things we place inside that matter, it's the pause we take to decide what belongs there. That pause, that moment, that's what the red box now holds best. You'll find another on a hillside near Bristol, turned into a sound library. A local sound artist installed headphones, a small recorder, and a rotating playlist of recordings. The sound of the sea during a storm, a child's laugh echoing inside a church, birdsong from the edge of the river, Severn, wind through a wheat field, a steam train leaving the station in 1956. Visitors step inside, put on the headphones, and for a few minutes they travel, not with feet, but with ears. And always, the last track is a silence, not empty, but whole. Even in central London, the transformation continues. One box has been filled with postcards, dozens of them, all sent by strangers. Visitors can take one and read it, then write their own. They don't have to send it. Most don't. They just leave it behind for the next person. Some write about what they saw that day. Others write to versions of themselves from years ago. And always, it's done in pencil, because thoughts, like phone calls, don't always need to last forever. As these adaptations multiply, a question arises. Why are people so drawn to these boxes? It isn't just the nostalgia. It's the shape, that soft domed roof, the grid of small square windows, the compact, comforting symmetry. It's human in scale, unlike so many parts of the modern world, built tall, fast, wide. The red telephone box is made for a single person at a time, just one. Step inside, close the door, and for a moment, the world reduces to a space the size of your breath. It invites stillness, even when there's no longer a phone to answer. This is perhaps why they continue to matter, because they offer the rarest thing in public: space, a corner just for you. Not a screen, not a scroll, not a rush, just a space to exist, to think, to listen, and perhaps to remember that communication once had a different rhythm. It wasn't always instant, or global, or silent. It used to be weighty, a receiver lifted, a voice heard, a message spoken with care, because you only had so much time and only so many coins, and perhaps that weight gave the words more meaning. People didn't speak just to fill silence. They chose their phrases. They listened for pauses. They said things like, "Is that you?" Or, "I'll be home soon." Or sometimes simply, "I'm still here." And that's what the red telephone box still seems to whisper. Even now, I'm still here, even without a working phone, even with peeling paint, even surrounded by a world that moves faster than it ever did before. it still offers a kind of connection, not to someone else, but to a moment, to the idea that not everything needs to change, that some things can remain and still have meaning. So, next time you walk past one, whether in London or in the corner of a quiet town, pause, step inside if the door opens. You don't have to do anything, just be there. Let the light filter through the red panes. Let the world blur slightly around you, and let yourself feel what the box has always held. Not wires or signals, but attention, a place that said, "You matter." Take a moment. This is your space. London knows how to carry its history, not just in museums or libraries or statues, but in the way it lives, in the curve of streets unchanged for centuries, in the lamplight that flickers across cobblestones each evening, and in the way everyday objects, unremarkable at first glance, become quiet monuments simply by staying. The red telephone box is one of those. It was never meant to be iconic. It wasn't designed for ceremony or praise. It was created to serve a purpose, to let someone speak, to let someone listen, and to do so anywhere, in rain, in fog, in snow, or sun. And yet, it became something more, not overnight, but gradually, through use, through affection, through the soft bond formed between place and person. By the 1990s, the red telephone box had already outlived the technology it was built for. Payphones were disappearing. Mobile phones were becoming smaller, cheaper, more common, and most people no longer needed to duck into a red booth to place a call. But they noticed when the booths began to vanish, a box missing from a corner it had occupied for decades felt like a tooth pulled from a smile. Something essential, if quiet, was gone. It sparked conversations, not about phones, but about public space, about design, about the importance of things that didn't shout, but stayed. People spoke up, and rather than fading quietly, the red telephone box entered its third life. Its first had been functional, its second, cultural, and now it had become reflective. Around this time, BT launched an Adopt a Kiosk program, inviting communities to take ownership of their local telephone boxes, usually for the token sum of $1. And so, these boxes passed from national infrastructure to personal care. They were swept out, repainted, given roofs that didn't leak, new hinges, new glass, new signs. Some became the heart of local campaigns, celebrated at village fetes, decorated with bunting during holidays, photographed in all seasons. Others were left exactly as they were, their owners believing that the wear and age told their own story. There's a small village in Yorkshire where one kiosk has been turned into a timekeeping box. Each week, a resident writes a note by hand, just a single sentence describing what happened in the village that week, and tapes it to the wall. No one signs their name, but over time, the box has become a kind of slow journal. You might read, Mrs. Featherstone's cat returned after 11 days. Looks thinner, but smug. First frost last night. Leaves crunchy underfoot. High winds blew down the scarecrow. Rebuilt, slightly handsomer. There's no reward for writing these notes. Only the quiet joy of keeping time in a shared space. In another village, the phone box has become a plant nursery. Tidy rows of seedlings in tiny clay pots sit on makeshift shelves. Locals water them, leave notes, sometimes trade one plant for another. There is no lock, no schedule, just trust. And there, too, the red box remains, not as a phone booth, but as a symbol of what shared care looks like. Not all are in rural corners. In the city, you'll find boxes turned into art exhibits. One in East London was taken over by a group of local artists who display rotating micro-galleries inside. Each month, a new theme. One month, things left unsaid. Another, letters never posted. A third, portraits of strangers. They invite anyone to contribute. Some leave photos, some poems, some only a folded piece of paper with a single word. And still, the box listens. Even the boxes that remain unused, no longer wired for anything, slowly weathering in place, carry a kind of presence, like old trees or closed gates. They serve as landmarks, not just in location, but in memory. You might not remember the number you dialed, or what you said, or why you called, but you might remember the feel of the door's handle in your hand, the way your voice echoed slightly inside, the sound of the coins dropping, the comfort of standing in that small, sturdy frame as the rain pattered on the roof. And perhaps that's why they endure, because they were simple, and that simplicity holds up a mirror to what we miss. Not the inconvenience, not the waiting, but the intention, the way you had to plan a call, the way your words had weight because you only had so much time, the way your hands felt as they pressed the cold metal of the receiver. There was no screen, no scrolling, no distraction, just your voice, their voice, and the small red space holding the moment together. Even now, when we live in a world of limitless communication, there's something comforting about the limits those booths once offered. They asked you to step away from the rush, to stand still, to speak with care. And in that way, the red telephone box didn't just connect people, it centered them. Today, more than ever, people find themselves drawn back to that quiet center, not because they need a phone, but because they need a pause, a corner, a stillness, a reminder of a slower pace once taken for granted. And so, the red boxes remain, not relics, not novelties, but quiet markers of dignity in design, of simplicity in space, of presence in the everyday. They remind us that some things, like small kindnesses, familiar shapes, and places to be briefly alone, are always worth preserving. There's something quietly extraordinary about watching a city wake up. Shutters roll open, the sound of sweeping begins. brooms against stone. A kettle whistles in the flat above the grocer. Steam curls from manholes, and the light, soft and uncertain, spills down narrow streets like it's rediscovering them one square at a time. In these early moments, the city belongs not to the noise, but to the stillness, and it's then that you notice them most. The red boxes, unmoved, not competing with the bustle, not crying out for attention, just there, like punctuation marks in a city's long story. One per corner, sometimes two, side by side like twins, each one standing alone, but never out of place. What's remarkable about these telephone boxes is that they were never just for London. They were sent across the country, installed in seaside towns where salt softened their corners, in mountain villages where snow buried them up to their windows, in industrial towns where soot blackened their domed roofs, even on the grounds of stately homes and in royal parks where birds nested on top and ivy crept quietly up their backs. Their design never asked to dominate a space. It asked only to belong in it. That was Sir Giles Gilbert Scott's true brilliance. He didn't make a monument. He made a shape that could settle in gently beside everything else. Victorian terraces, Edwardian storefronts, brutalist concrete towers, rolling moors, crumbling stone walls. And because of that adaptability, the red telephone box became not a symbol of change, but of consistency. It became a backdrop to the lives of people who didn't think much of it at the time. The milkman, the night nurse, the child walking home from school, a couple kissing quietly just outside its door. It was always just there until it wasn't. When the removals began, what surprised many wasn't just how few boxes remained. It was how many stories suddenly came flooding back. People began sharing memories in newspapers, in letters to editors, in local radio interviews, and handwritten postcards. One man remembered calling his father from a booth on his first day of work in a new city. A woman remembered using one to tell her sister she was engaged. After dropping 2 coins and a small note of courage, a pensioner recalled dialing the emergency services from a kiosk when he found a fox caught in fencing behind the allotments. It wasn't the phone call they remembered, it was the place and how it held them. The interior of a red telephone box is always the same and always different. Step inside and you're met with the familiar, the smell of dust and metal, the coolness of glass, the sound, slightly muted, the hush, almost sacred, but each booth wears its own fingerprints. Graffiti from the 1980s, hearts and initials scratched faintly into paint, faded instruction cards taped and retaped to the back panel, a directory missing its cover, a single penny stuck in the corner near the floor. Some still carry a faint echo of conversation, a whisper caught in the hinges, a breath that never quite left. These boxes were never large, but they held more than just bodies. They held moments. As the modern world continues to move forward, flashing, scrolling, always on, it's easy to forget how rare stillness has become. The red telephone box now offers that stillness. It no longer buzzes with conversation, but it hums with presence. It doesn't ring, but it remembers, and that remembering is valuable because not everything needs to change. Some things can remain exactly as they are, not because they're perfect, but because they've proven themselves to be true. In parts of London, you can now rent a red telephone box, not to make a call, but to sell coffee, print documents, offer local maps. In others, they remain untouched, doors sealed, phones long gone, but the booth still standing in all its familiar red. A few have been relocated to museums, placed indoors, and preserved like sculpture, but the ones that remain in the wild, in the elements, among the people, carry a different kind of value. They are lived with, not just looked at, and there's something special in that. The city is filled with loud things, new things, flashy, attention-seeking things, but the red telephone box is none of those. It is quiet, and it's that quiet that makes it endure. It doesn't ask for anything. It simply says, I'm still here. If you need a moment, if you need a breath, if you need to remember, I'll be waiting. There's a peculiar kind of silence that lives in old things, not the silence of emptiness, but the quiet of presence, the way a grandfather clock ticks even when no one's listening, the way a library smells like paper and patience, the way a red telephone box stands in a drizzle, its paint beating with rain, content to be still. This is the silence the red telephone box carries. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't compete. It just remains. And in that remaining, it gathers something rare, quiet trust. The British countryside holds many such booths. Some are half hidden by hedges. Some stand at the end of long stone driveways. Some, forgotten for years, are rediscovered by hikers or cyclists who pause not to make a call, but to lean inside and feel the hush. In Shropshire, there's a red box by a barley field. Locals call it the listener, not because it has a phone, it doesn't, but because people step inside to think. Farmers, postmen, school children, one woman who walks her dog that way each morning, leaves poems inside, tucked behind the old instruction sheet, changed once a week, handwritten. Another man said he once stepped inside to cry and found, unexpectedly, he wasn't the only one who had. Someone had written, very faintly, on the glass with their finger, "Me too." That's what the telephone box offers. Now, not connection through wires, but through moments. Back in London, their function continues to shift. Some have become micro-cinemas. Yes, cinemas. Step inside, and a small screen plays a 3-minute film, on loop, often silent, always reflective. One film showed fog rolling in across the Thames. Another, time-lapse footage of tea steeping. Another still footage of a young girl reading her grandfather's letters. Visitors are invited not just to watch, but to slow down, to stand in stillness while something unfolds. And maybe that's the point of the red box now. Not urgency, but unfolding. People often ask, why red? The answer, in part, is visibility. The General Post Office, which managed early telephone infrastructure, wanted something unmistakable, something that could be found on foggy nights or stormy mornings, something no one could miss. But over time, that visibility gained another purpose. Red became not just noticeable, but emotional. It symbolized something enduring, something known, something cared for. In a city that changes as fast as London does, that kind of constancy is rare and precious. So while newer kiosks were introduced in metallic gray or clear glass, the red ones remained beloved because they felt human. There's a retired teacher in Devon who runs a local history club for children. Each month, she tells a story inside their village's adopted red phone box. 6 children, 1 folding stool, and a thermos of cocoa. They sit cross-legged in the booth, listening to tales about their town's railway line, or the flood of 1947, or the baker who once won a prize for the country's longest baguette. When asked why she holds the club in the phone box, she says, because children remember stories better when they have walls around them. That might be true for all of us, and the telephone box offers exactly that, a small space to hold a memory. The design of the box itself helps with this. Everything about it is quiet. The weight of the door, neither too heavy nor too light. The way it swings shut with a click, not a slam. The gritted panes of glass, allowing light in, but softening the outside world. The shape of the roof, rounded, not sharp, not aggressive. Even the color, though bold, feels warm. It doesn't glare. It glows. It's the red of woolen mittens, of ripe cherries, of old post boxes and theater curtains. It's not warning. It's welcome. And now, more than ever, people are beginning to notice what it feels like to be welcomed by a space, to have a place to step into, not for consumption, not for speed, not for signal, but for stillness. The red telephone box has become one of those places. It is no longer about the phone. It's about the feeling. The moment when someone reaches for the handle, the way the outside noise softens, the pause before speaking, the decision to say something that matters, or to say nothing at all. Because now, the silence is part of it, too. And that silence speaks of something important. It says, I've been here before you. I've waited. I remember. And all you have to do is step inside. As cities grow, they often forget how to be quiet. New structures rise quickly. Steel and glass stacked in grids, shaped by efficiency. Roads widen. Skylines sharpen. Corners lose their curves. And yet, somehow, nestled within this forward-moving machinery, there remain small pockets of stillness. Like threads in an old coat, they hold the shape of something softer. The red telephone box is one of those threads. Doesn't keep up. It doesn't need to. It simply remains. Soft-edged, iron-framed, unbothered by urgency. And within that stillness, it tells us something. That not everything needs to be replaced to remain relevant. That presence can be just as powerful as progress. That some designs are timeless, not because they resist change, but because they hold space for it. As more communities across the UK adopt and repurpose their red boxes, the possibilities have become as varied as the people who pass them. In a small fishing village in Cornwall, a red box has become a weather station. Not digital, not electric. Inside, you'll find a barometer, a thermometer, and a small clipboard with a pen dangling from string. Each morning, a resident records the temperature, wind direction, and their general feeling about the day's forecast. Entries like chilly but optimistic, gray and polite, storm warning, but fish still biting. It's not scientific, it's something better, shared, and in its way, the red box becomes what it always was meant to be, a place where information meets emotion, where facts and feelings sit side by side. Elsewhere, one box has been filled with emergency supplies, bottled water, blankets, small snacks in sealed tins. It's not locked. There is no official sign, but people know it's there. A quiet signal that says, someone thought of you before you arrived. That's what makes these spaces so special. They're not merely preserved. They're adapted with care, not to sell, not to entertain, but to remind that even in a fast, digital world, a small red booth at the corner of a street can still offer comfort, can still offer pause, can still be useful in a way more important than any signal. Some cities have tried to recreate the magic, launching glossy, modern booths with digital screens and sleek lighting. They are efficient, bright, uncluttered, but they are not held in the same way because the red telephone box is not beloved for its perfection. It's beloved for its familiarity, its texture, its sound, its patient geometry. It's a thing people remember touching, and that memory is layered, generation over generation, voice over voice. So when people walk by one, they see not just an object, but a presence. They might say, oh, that's just an old phone box. But inside, they feel something else. Continuity, a held breath, a shared hush. By now, there are fewer red boxes than ever before, and yet they've never been more meaningful. Because they've proven that even in a world of relentless forward movement, we still have room for the quiet, the local, the small. The red telephone box reminds us that public space can still feel personal, that design can still carry dignity, that memory, when honored gently, becomes future-proof. It stands, as it always has, not demanding, but dependable, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to remember, waiting, always, with the door just slightly open. As we near the upper end of this story, we find ourselves not in the past, but gently rooted in the present, surrounded by red boxes, still standing, still waiting, still quietly holding their place in a changing world. Not all of them gleam with fresh paint. Some are weathered, some lean slightly, some have glass panes, long since fogged by time and condensation, but all of them share something more important than condition, continuity. Each one, whether gleaming in a square or slouched by a bus stop, carries with it the same quiet promise. Was here before, and I'm still here now. There's one in Sussex, tucked beside a cricket green, that's been turned into a listening box. No headphones, no technology, just a bench inside and a tiny placard on the door that reads, "Come in, leave nothing, take nothing, just listen." People step in, often without knowing why. They sit, and then they notice the way the wind moves through the frame, the tap of raindrops against glass, the shifting sound of children playing at the far end of the green, a bee landing near the hinge, the hush of their own thoughts, no longer competing with anything. It's one of the few places in the world where you can enter a public space and be expected to do nothing at all. And that may be why it fills people up so completely. Elsewhere, in a London suburb, a red telephone box has become a memory exchange. Inside is a notebook, half full, always open to a fresh page. Anyone may write in it. There are no prompts. Still, the pages are covered in confessions, thank yous, regrets, songs, recipes, hopes. One reads, "I haven't spoken to my brother in 12 years. I dialed his number here, but didn't press the final digit. Maybe tomorrow." Another, "This is where my mum used to call my dad from after their shift at the bakery." And one more, written in small slanted writing near the back. "I came in because I was lost, but I feel found now. Thank you, whoever keeps this here." That's the magic of these boxes now. They don't offer conversation. They offer space. You see, a red telephone box never asked for much. It didn't need to be the center of attention. It never promised transformation, only connection, in whatever form was needed that day. Sometimes a phone call, sometimes a few minutes out of the rain, sometimes a photo, sometimes a memory stored for later, and now, sometimes, just a place to stop moving, to breathe, to notice the sky, to be quiet. We live in a time where nearly every object we touch is temporary. Phones change, apps update, buildings rise and fall. Designs are reimagined before they ever settle in. But the red telephone box, it has settled into place, into memory, into meaning. It is a design that asked not to impress, but to endure. And so it has. In many ways, it has become one of the last unchanging things in some neighborhoods. The cafe changed hands. The newsagent closed. The corner shop now sells flat whites and oat milk, but the red box, still there, still standing, still telling everyone, in its small, quiet way, this place once mattered and still does. We don't have many objects like that anymore, objects that hold both place and memory, that hold both public space and private story. And maybe that's why, even now, children still ask about them, still peek through the windows, still tug their parents' sleeve and say, "What's that?" And when the parent answers, however they answer, they begin another story, one of place, one of connection, one of a box painted red that once let the whole world pause. Even now, after a century of use, a red telephone box still has a way of catching the light. It doesn't reflect like chrome. It doesn't shine like glass. It glows, softly, reliably, no matter the weather. It's the kind of object that rarely changes and yet never looks out of place. It can sit outside a post office, beside a centuries-old church, or in the shadow of a modern apartment block, and it never feels like it doesn't belong. That's the quiet power of thoughtful design. It doesn't shout. It settles in. It becomes part of the scenery until you look again and realize it's one of the last pieces of that scenery that hasn't changed. In these final chapters of their journey, the red telephone boxes no longer hold cables and ringing tones. They hold rituals. People visit them on walks just to check if they're still there. Tourists photograph them, not for novelty, but as proof that something they saw in a film or a childhood story really exists. Volunteers sweep their corners, replace cracked glass, repaint hinges, and no matter how many new technologies arrive, the red telephone box stays because it no longer exists to be used. It exists to be known. Take the one in Northumberland, near the edge of a coastal road. It's been there since the 1940s. No longer connected, no longer functional, and yet, every summer, someone places a small vase of wildflowers inside. No note, no credit, just beauty for its own sake. Once, a visitor left a letter there, unsealed. It simply read, "If you're reading this, I hope you know the world is better with you in it." Someone else replied beneath it, "I came here on a difficult day. You made it better. Thank you." That letter now lives in a laminated sleeve, preserved inside the booth, and others have added their own lines to the wall. In pencil, "I used to call my mom from here. I proposed to my wife just outside this door. This box held me when nothing else did." It's no longer about the phone. It's about what the space was always meant to hold. Care, connection, a pause between the noise. People often wonder what will happen to the red telephone boxes in the next 100 years. Will they all become museums? Will they vanish entirely? Perhaps a few will, but not all, because by now, too many people have found something meaningful in them, not because of what they do, but because of what they offer. A box that doesn't sell anything, that doesn't rush you, that doesn't Ask for attention, a box that simply waits for your voice, your thought, your stillness. In that way, the red telephone box has outgrown its original purpose. It has become a mirror, not of technology, but of what people needed before technology. The need to speak, to be heard, to reach out, and maybe now to slow down, to remember, to stand in a small space with nothing blinking, nothing ringing, nothing buzzing, and feel something you haven't felt all day. Quiet. As we approach the end of this story, it's worth pausing one last time to consider what the red telephone box really gave us. Not just phone calls, not just a place to stand, but the idea that public space can feel personal, that design can feel warm, that something as ordinary as a telephone booth could become a companion to memory. You didn't need to use it every day to feel it belonged. It was simply part of the world, and somehow, in staying put, it made the world feel a little steadier too. Even stories that stretch across 100 years must find a place to rest. And so, we come to the final part of this story, not with a dramatic end, but with a gentle settling, like dusk folding itself around a familiar street. The red telephone box, once a marvel of modern convenience, has become something quieter, not an artifact, not a machine, but a companion. It doesn't demand to be noticed, and yet those who pass it often do. They glance, they pause, they remember. Not every memory is grand. Some are no more than a smile at the sight of a box that hasn't moved while everything else has. Some are layered with emotion, the sound of a voice you loved on the other end of the line, or the feeling of your hand on the cold handle during a storm. And others are imagined, curious, wistful, wondering what those tiny rooms once held for others. And maybe that's what the red box truly is now, a quiet container of shared imagining. In Hampstead, there's a red telephone box that faces a small park. It's not in any guidebooks. No plaques mark its story, but the neighbors know it. They decorate it with a garland at Christmas time. They tuck folded poems inside the frame on rainy days. Children leave drawings on the floor, protected it from the wind. Someone once left a single plum on the shelf with a note that said, "For anyone who forgot breakfast." The phone hasn't worked in years, but the kindness inside it never stopped working. That's the truth of these booths. They no longer serve calls, but they serve all the same as shelters, as time capsules, as tiny places of pause and comfort. They offer us a place to remember the shape of stillness in cities that move quickly, in lives filled with alerts and reminders and scrolling windows, in days that start with to-do lists and end with blinking screens. The red box waits, not because it's behind, but because it knows something we sometimes forget. That connection isn't just about reach, it's about presence. What began as a box with a phone has become something poetic, a red beacon of familiarity, nostalgia, and thoughtful design. Its curved roof, its square panes, its sturdy door, its warm, recognizable red, all of it has settled into the backdrop of 1,000 places and into the memory of millions of people. You may never need to use one again, but you'll likely remember where you saw your last one, and in that remembering, it continues to live. We often say the world is changing fast, and it is, but not everything must vanish to make room for what comes next. Some things, like red telephone boxes, deserve to stay, not because we need them, but because we are better for having them. So the next time you pass one, let yourself slow. Place a hand on the door, lean in, take a breath. It will not buzz, it will not flash, it will not call you back, but it will be there, unmoved, unchanged, unrushed. And that, in this world, is something worth pausing for. Thank you for walking slowly through this story with me, for listening not just with your ears, but with your breath and your imagination. And now, let the hush of this story settle over you like a soft coat. Let the presence of the red box follow you into dreams, quiet, steady, warm. Let your body grow still. Let your thoughts grow light. Let sleep gather gently and fully. You are safe. You are held. You are home. Good night.